After displaying his incredible new appearance on social media and drawing a whole lot of criticism for allegedly using performance-enhancing drugs, Conor McGregor has finally responded. The Irishman posted a video of himself flexing his muscles, which led to a comment speculating that he might be using drugs, and one of the biggest voices against McGregor appears to be fellow UFC fighter Aljamain Sterling. So what does he have to say about McGregor? Also, who else believes the Irishman is taking performance-enhancing drugs? Let's take a closer look. First up, in recent controversial UFC news, Aljamain Sterling has publicly revealed that he believes Conor McGregor is taking steroids. Here is what he had to say. Aljamain Sterling, the bantamweight champion of the UFC, has recently started questioning Conor McGregor's insane physical transformation. McGregor, now aged 34, weighed only 156 pounds for his final bout against Dustin Poirier in July 2021, which he suffered a huge loss. But while he was healing from his leg injury, he put on more than 30 pounds, which seems incredibly unbelievable considering he was healing. But the Irishman's recent increase in muscle has put him in hot water because some competitors and fans have accused him of utilizing steroids. One of his biggest accusers is Aljamain Sterling, who commented on McGregor's physique in his podcast The Weekly Scraps. He stated, "The man continues to be jacked. The size of his arms makes me wonder what he's on. He now has a bodybuilder-like appearance, and it appears he is not the only one who thinks so." Now, only adding to the suspicion, McGregor has admitted to dropping out of the USADA testing pool, saying he would be granted a waiver allowing him to forego the usual 6 months of compulsory testing. McGregor would only have to go through testing twice after earning an exemption, but USADA officials have already stated publicly that it's highly unlikely that McGregor will receive an exemption. For his anticipated return later this year, the Irishman, who began his UFC career as a featherweight, has been tipped to weigh in at 170 pounds. Sterling believes that McGregor is relishing his jacked and happy physique after once appearing dead when weighing in at 145 pounds for his prior battles. The bantamweight champion acknowledged that many of McGregor's social media posts, especially the ones in which he appears tuned up, have given him the creeps and are anything but natural. But what do you think? Do you think McGregor really is taking steroids? Speaking of, Sterling is far from the only one calling out McGregor. Podcast host and UFC commentator Joe Rogan also believes he's juicing. Now, Joe Rogan is without a doubt the most prominent person to recently suspect that Conor McGregor might be abusing performance-enhancing substances, stating that he looks like his piss would melt a USADA cup. Since breaking his tibia and fibula at UFC 264 in July of last year, McGregor hasn't competed. He has since recovered completely, though, and is getting ready to make his long-awaited comeback in 2023. The 34-year-old, who has stated his desire to fight again at welterweight, has spent a significant portion of 2022 fattening up in preparation for legendary opponents like champion Leon Edwards, Kamaru Usman, and Jorge Masvidal. McGregor's return, though, might be postponed because USADA typically demands fighters re-entering the testing pool to undergo 6 months of drug testing prior to competing. However, the UFC has just disclosed modifications regarding the USADA testing protocol, so it's unclear how this will affect McGregor when he comes back. Now, Rogan, who the UFC has employed since 1997, recently made some observations on McGregor's physical change and absence from the USADA program. Rogan even made fun of the man on his podcast. Now, it should also be noted that Rogan called out Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson for using performance-enhancing drugs as well, so the Irishman wasn't the only target. The UFC analyst stated that he thought McGregor had discovered a way to utilize narcotics without breaking the law. He stated, "The funny thing is that USADA has a loophole that permits you to get out of the testing pool. You can get out of the testing pool and just juice up." Since Rogan made these public claims, McGregor has addressed him after the latter recently made fun of him for pointing out that Rogan looks exactly the same as he did 25 years ago, implying that he too must be doing or have done steroids as well. But of course, this is all speculation. Speaking of McGregor, Sean O'Malley has recently given his take on who the Irishman will make his debut fight against in 2023. According to Sean O'Malley, Conor McGregor's biggest bout in 2023 will depend on the potential for pay-per-view revenue. Now, as previously mentioned, McGregor hasn't competed since suffering a leg injury at UFC UFC 264 in July 2021, but the Irishman will make his much-awaited comeback to the octagon this year after undergoing surgery, rehabilitation, and training. But as we've already established, before McGregor can participate, he must wait 6 months before returning to the USADA testing pool. Sean O'Malley chose who he thought Conor McGregor would face in his 2023 comeback as the biggest match during a recent interview with Helen Yee. The fellow UFC fighter stated Nick Diaz would be the biggest bout in terms of pay-per-view sales, but he continued claiming that realistically, Michael Chandler and Jorge Masvidal could be his opponents. Now we know at UFC 266 in September 2021, Nick Diaz last competed, but he lost to Robbie Lawler by TKO. McGregor and Nate Diaz, Nick's brother, have a relationship history. In 2016, the two fought back-to-back at UFC 196 and UFC 202. Meanwhile, Nate Diaz triumphed in March 2016, but McGregor defeated him in August of that same year. Although a trilogy bout has been predicted, it has never happened and could potentially never happen. But what do you think about O'Malley's choice to welcome Conor McGregor back to the octagon in 2023? Who do you want to see the Irishman up against when he finally returns? That is, if he passes the drug test, of course. Now, since we're finally in the new year, here are some of the biggest fights we hope will take place this year. Fans saw a full year of action-packed events and fights in which new champions were installed and rising contenders became household names in the UFC in 2022. These fights provided MMA betting chances throughout the year and produced high-caliber matches and entertainment. However, as 2023 draws closer, the Las Vegas-based company should schedule a number of thrilling matches and super fights to give punters additional opportunities to wager on UFC odds. First up, Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. Jon Jones's eagerly anticipated comeback and heavyweight debut didn't take place in 2022 for several reasons, but primarily because of failed contract negotiations. Since his final light heavyweight championship defense against Dominic Reyes in March 2020, Bones hasn't made an appearance since the octagon and has since given up the 205-pound title in order to move up in weight. The fact that he'll be battling against some of the UFC's toughest and most brutal men excited fans. Francis Ngannou, the current UFC heavyweight champion, triumphed in his first title defense against Cyril Gane in January 2021, although he was sidelined following the victory because of an injury. Ngannou is keen to return after almost fully recovering from the injury mentioned above. The UFC may now schedule him in a title match against the man who is largely regarded as the greatest light heavyweight champion in history since he has effectively eliminated the division. This fight between Jones and Ngannou will be a total slam dunk if it happens. Next, we definitely want to see Henry Cejudo versus Aljamain Sterling. Henry Cejudo, a former UFC doubleweight champion, announced his retirement following his final fight against Dominic Cruz in May 2020 and has since stated his desire to compete once more inside the octagon. Aljamain Sterling, the current UFC bantamweight champion who has won 3 titles and is riding an 8-fight winning run, has been the subject of his attacks, and 2 have engaged in back-and-forth social media sparring. Given that Triple C and the Funkmaster are both only 2 years older than each other and may still be in their prime, a fight between the two would undoubtedly be at the top of the heap. To compete once more in the UFC, Cejudo has to rejoin the USADA pool in May 2022. The Las Vegas-based company might allow him to defend his belt against Sterling, as he was a former 2-division UFC champion. This would establish him as the undisputed global champion at 135 pounds. And of course, a bout between Conor McGregor and Jorge Masvidal would be an absolute spectacle. Conor McGregor versus Jorge Masvidal at welterweight is the only match the UFC wants to schedule if they want a high-profile fight in 2023. Despite their individual losing streaks, the two are currently the most well-known fighters in the UFC. Masvidal has had 2 title losses to Kamaru Usman, while McGregor has suffered back-to-back defeats to Dustin Poirier. The two fighters have similar striking-based fighting styles, therefore a match between the notorious and game-bred is sure to be exciting. Both boxers have a strong boxing component to their fighting styles. If this fight happens, everyone will be entertained not only on the fight night, but also during the build-up because McGregor and Masvidal are both well-known for being great talkers. As a result, expect a seesaw struggle on the mic. Finally, a bout between Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira II would be legendary. Israel Adesanya was one of the 2 athletes on our UFC pound-for-pound rankings that suffered shocking last-second defeats in 2022. He had the worst round of his career and the worst possible time after dominating for the majority of his 5-round fight with longtime kickboxing foe Alex Vieira in November. The man who has plagued his combat sports career defeated him once more, but this time in mixed martial arts, ending his protracted tenure as middleweight champion of the UFC. A rematch is one of the UFC fights that is a definite must-have for 2023. But who would be your ideal match in 2023? What bout would rock the UFC world? Let us know in the comments below. Well, unfortunately, guys, that is all the time we have for today. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and as always, thanks for watching.